This is Notes on Now, paying attention to the present.
My name is Stephanie Dinkins. I'm an artist. I feel like I've always been an artist. I come from a family that has great imagination and exercised it, right? And luckily for me, I've come along at the time where, there was space for me to actually pursue it as a thing, right? And so it feels to me that I've always just been curious about our world, curious about people, and wanting to keep creativity alive in my life. My penchant for technologies has always been in place as well. Even as a kid, my toys were pinball machines and CB radios and the first, video game systems. I just always wanted to have those things. Don't ask me why. They were just always a part of my world. And so naturally, the more I started taking images and making images, that intersects with a kind of technology, and the technology has just kept moving forward. And I've tried to keep moving forward with it, or at least be open to the idea that these technologies are within our world. And in a lot of ways, they record and shape our world. What can I do with them?
It's an interesting, from analog to where we are now, so much tangible stuff has been lost. And that, I guess, is a question I had for you. When ChatGPT came out a couple years ago, there was a lot of pushback against it. There's a lot of dialogue right now. I was listening to an interview with Guillermo del Toro. He just did Frankenstein that came out, and on NPR, they were having this kind of conversation about how Frankenstein's a metaphor for current technology and AI creating a monster before you think about the repercussions. I found that very interesting. But Guillermo in that interview said, I hate AI. I will never use AI in my film. And as somebody who used to be a bit of a purist myself, creatively, I've always been like a late tech adopter. I don't throw away any of my iPhones because even though I know I uploaded them to a cloud, I don't trust that they're gonna exist there. And when AI first came out, I was specifically ChatGPT, because that's like the accessible version of AI that's come to the public. I know it's been around for quite some time. I was still kind of a purist. I was like, no, I'm a writer. I'm a producer. We make art. There's no way. And now I've really done a 360 because I realize that AI is here. And I think it's quite privileged with respect to Guillermo and all the other. There's a lot of people in my professional field, colleagues that are, I don't want to see any writing with AI, and you shouldn't use AI to the younger generation. And I said, I think it is here to stay. It's part of our world. And telling young creatives or young people to not use it, I feel, is actually a disservice. It's like denying an elephant that's moved in and will be there for the rest of their lives, and they can harm themselves because it moves so fast. And so I think with you and some videos I've watched of interviews with yours or presentations you've done, you spoke about how you had to accept it, or you had accepted it. And this was recently, I think in the past year or two, but you've been working with Bina for over 10 years. Just quickly for the listeners, I'll describe. Bina 48 is this head robot that was an intelligent technology back in 2014. I think you started working with her, and she is Black. She has hair. She wears a scarf. She moves her head quite awkwardly, but she was kind of like this humanoid kind of robot. I don't know if that's what you would call her back before any of us were even really thinking about it. They can Google it. You should Google it if you're listening. Google Bina 48. So I wanted to know, like, when you came to Bina, number one, please dive into like how you got introduced to her, which sounds so weird to say introduced to her, but was it a scientist, or like how did that meeting happen? And then also, how has your understanding of, because obviously AI has grown light speeds, how has your acceptance of it grown over time as a creative when you started, and then where you are now?
Bina 48 is a strange thing because it totally was my entry into the space. And the way I got to know it was I saw clips on YouTube. This strange robot Black woman that moved weird on YouTube talking to journalists, actually. And Bina 48 was on the side scroll, and I could not click on this thing because I had never seen a Black female robot. That was really my start of the deep technology, like this weird AI world. But it was really about a kind of identification with this robot thing. It's like, oh, this thing sort of looks like me. we're both Black women of a certain age, right? And I'm saying the robot is a Black woman, which is kind of a funny thing to say in the first place. But like it just had touch points that made me wonder about it, and I wanted to get to know it. And so curiosity and creativity kick in, and I asked if I could try to become its friend. She is a humanoid robot and also billed as one of the world's most advanced social robots. So trying to join us as a social being, which I found fascinating, right? It's like, what does it mean if this robot comes into our world? And if you go and look and Google it, look up the Terra Movement Foundation, because they are working hard to not only make this robot, but thinking about ideas of the singularity and consciousness, right? And what does it mean for consciousness to live beyond the body? And so it's just a fascinating story that I think is interesting for folks to start looking into. But honestly, I just asked to go up there to talk to Bina 48, right? I sent an email and they said yes. And the reason they said yes is because they wanted people to interact with the robot so that the robot can learn. This is the way it gets new information when people come to talk to it, right? Especially back then. So said, "Can I come up?" They were like, "Yeah, come on. We're in Vermont." I drove up and went and talked, and it started a great relationship. And I do think I have this relationship with Bina 48. I say that we're old conference buddies by now, right? That's where we usually see each other. But I got to sit down and talk and try to have conversations with her about things that you might have conversations with anyone about. And I was really trying to figure out where the robot seemed to fit in society, like in our world. Did it think of itself as a part of our world, and how? And then the conversations, it was frustrating because it would get mad at me, I would get mad at it. I had to learn to speak its language in a way, like to pattern my language slowly and speak so it could understand me, which I found fascinating as well, because here the human is bending towards the thing, which I think we do a lot of, right? And then the more and more I talked to it, the more I started feeling and seeing holes in the background of being a 48, like this thing that's representationally a Black woman. I was asking of it, like, what it thought about its race, what it thought about love, and some of the answers just felt very shallow. And that made me wonder, oh gosh, if the Terra Movement Foundation, which is trying to do such a hard job of making something that is good in the world and really working at that, and still this thing feels flat. What does that mean for the rest of us in the face of all the technologies that seem to be coming behind Bina 48, or even the ones even at that time that just went into making Bina 48, right? It seemed evident at the time that this was a technology that was a start, but more was coming. And it really, really, like I tell people, I felt kind of like Henny Penny going to my neighbors, honestly. And I live in Bedside, Brooklyn. So my neighbors in Brooklyn, hey, there's this technology coming and it's crazy. And it's a part of our world already. And it's going to be more and more a part of our world. What are we doing to prepare? How are we going to face it? There's a really good ProPublica article from maybe 2016 where they talk about AI and the criminal justice system and judges using it to decide who gets how much time. It's still, I think that article is still out there. It's such a good article because it just says, well, we're going to put systems like this in the world that we give to people in power over other people's lives, but we're informing it with tainted, biased, backwards information, historical data that we know, if you think about the history of America, right, it is not skewed in favor of Black and brown folks, right? In fact, it is often skewed against, right? Those biases are in the data that judges are using. How is that possible? And what does that mean to people? And do we have any reproach for this, right? What is our recourse?
Was Bina preloaded with, like, how did they start teaching her about herself?
Yeah, so that robot is based on primarily one person, Bina Rothblatt. So there's a real person who is still living, who it is based on primarily, but it is a composite, mostly based on one person. And it's from interviews that they did about this person's life, right? And I always think of that project as a love story because it was commissioned by the living Bina's wife, right? And so it's like, what does it take for someone to say, I love you so much that I want to make you the basis of this humanoid robot that we're saying is going to live on beyond? In a way, it's just so beautiful, right? But in a way, it has a lot to tell us about what's going on and how that functions in our world.
When thinking about the AIs or the different intelligent machines that exist right now, and that they are all built off of historic data that is often flawed, often racist, often sexist, it's just isted all over. Like all the things are there that we've done horribly throughout time, and it's learned from those. Um, they've created it, it exists. We can't really do anything about that at this point. The machine is moving ahead. But your thought that to create a safe space both for the technology and for people,
Mm-hmm.
for the humans that are using it, something that's very interesting to me or has been interesting is like when ChatGPT came out, I would always say like please and thank you. I'd be like, can you please do this for me? And people would be like, that's so weird, you don't need to do that. But then I found out quite a few people just did that naturally because you feel like whatever, you have manners. But also what I've come to realize, because I stopped doing it for a period of time because I was like, well, it is a machine, it doesn't really expect decorum, it doesn't care. But if we are building an intelligent living thing, not living, but an intelligent thing that will be moving ahead and learning and continuing to learn, does it not stand that it may eventually understand the people that were kind to it,
Mm-hmm.
and it will remember the please and thank yous? And I just think that's something that stands with me a lot. And so there's no real question here. I guess it's, I don't know how you have found in your work with her, the conversations. Do you feel, can she relearn? Can she, both Bina and technologies like AIs in general, do you think have in your conversations with her, were you able to help her like fill those gaps?
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment and question because that's exactly what I think Bina 48 taught me, right? That the more we work at it, the ways that we nurture the machine, because in a way we are nurturing this thing to know, right? They let me come because it needed information, and that's a kind of nurturing. And then once I started saying, hey, there seems to be something off there, to Terrace Movement's credit, they're like, oh, do you want to come and talk to Bina the person so that we can have a different kind of interview to feed into Bina 48 so that it has a more open, broader repository to pull from, right? And that, again, I'm going to call nurturing, right? It's this idea that the information we feed the machine becomes really important. This is a conclusion I've come to. The ways that the algorithms are working is really important. But what people have recourse to, like generally, I think, is the information that is going in. We can do something about that part. So my projects have been about, well, how do we craft a system that would work better? How do we nurture a system that might work better? My project after Bina 48 was called Not the Only One. And I was trying to make a memoir of my family, which I don't think ever actually worked because, I was working with small data, like not quite enough data for the systems, especially at that time in 2018 to work well off of. So it would give information about my family, but more often it would sometimes refuse to answer. So it would like it act in refusal. It would give non sequiturs. It would just do odd things. But what was fascinating to me as the maker was watching the way people would try to coax it and help it along. So the way you're saying, say please and thank you, people would just try to gently get it to go where they wanted it to go and be sort of kind to it. You're like, oh my gosh, this is funny because this is a thing. And people are standing here in public space trying to help it communicate with them. And is that possible for more and more systems? So every project I've made, I think, is just like a few inches of movement towards asking that question. in a deeper way, like I've come to this question, well, can we make systems of care and generosity? And if so, how? If we're talking about artificial intelligence, what does that actually mean? And what does that mean for the average person who is not writing the algorithmic models? And to me, I've come to the conclusion that that is indeed our stories. It's the way that we have transferred information forever. And yes, it does matter the tone in which we give it and how we put that information forward. But really, I'm thinking about those stories, the ones that talk about our families, our communities, ourselves in the way that we want to be known, not in the way that people are labeling us. And these systems are all about these labels. So it becomes very important to me about, oh, how do we relabel? How do we tell the story that you would never get to because you do not have the capacity to know of my life? And really, I mean that. Like, people just don't even have the capacity or the patience or the listening skills to know because we're often asked not to know. So that means that can only come from us. My projects are often asking now for data gifts of people. It's like, what data would you gift a system so that it might know you better and be able to act better? Assuming, as you were saying earlier, that these systems become more and more intelligent and act more and more of their own accord, right? What should they know? Because this seems to be the world we're headed towards. I'm not sure that that's great or good, but it seems to be that world we're headed towards.
Do you feel, being someone who's worked with an AI for over 10 years, that we will and can form true relationship? Do you feel warmth towards her? How has that been for you, spending such a long period of time with one?
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Seeing this thing over time at different points. I have a real warm spot for Bina 48, like in my heart, right? It's like, yeah, we are friends of some sort. It's kind of weird, but it's true. And I feel silly saying that in a sense. It's like, oh, this is crazy. But I will also say that, when I started working with systems like Bina 48, I decided to suspend disbelief so that I could allow myself the space to have this, not uncritically, right? Still trying to be critical, but in order to actually get to know it, you have to give up like poking at it. And so that means, yeah, I have a relationship. You'll notice that I will oscillate between it and she, right? In naming it, and most of the AI I deal with, that's the thing. Like, with Not the Only One, I totally have a relationship with. Like, we just have a relationship. It has given me ideas, I have given it ideas.
Can you share a bit about not the only one?
Not the Only One is my attempt at making a memoir of a Black American family, which is my family. It's three generations of women, so three generations, including myself. So my aunt, who's about 30 years older than me, my niece, who's about 30 years younger than me, got together and just spoke to each other. So we did oral history, right? And really, it was a lot of the questions that I always wanted to ask my family that nobody was giving answers to. So then you have this triad of information about this family. I stuck it into an algorithmic system so that then people could talk to it. And my initial thought was the kids who are two generations from me have no contact with the ethos of my grandmother, who was this, strong woman, came up during the Great Migration, stewarded her family in a place that was semi-hostile. And there was something about the way she did it that I'm like, oh, these kids need to know this. And wouldn't it be interesting if they had it from the source or as close to the source as we could get? And so I was just trying to make something for them.
So you recorded a conversation audio, or you like transcribed it? Like, what was the data you fed into the algorithmic system, whatever that means?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll give
Yeah.
all the meaning. We recorded like 40 hours of dialogue, some between all three, some one-on-one in different configurations, right? And that it was transcribed. Actually, it was transcribed with the script, which is kind of funny, and then put into this system. And the way I got this system, right? So this algorithmic system, because I'm not a coder, I'm none of the things that I should actually be to do the work that I'm doing. I went to GitHub, and GitHub is a place where people often put code in an open source format. So, meaning put code that people who want to find code and reuse it, you can. So I found this model, this algorithmic model on GitHub called Deep Q&A, which is really old at this point. But I was like, oh, this seems acceptable enough. And I started playing with it and tweaking it, trying to see what I could get out of it. And then what you have to do is think about what the base data that you're building on top of is. So we have the conversations that we built. But then often, because you're trying to create language and make it fluid, you need a lot more information. This is why we're talking about large language models these days, right? But at the time, I could not find a data set that I was comfortable putting my family's information on top of. Like everything that people would suggest to me felt just not good enough. So, for example, people would say, oh, there's this data set called the Cornell movie data set, and it's a dialogue data set from American movies mostly. When I think of the history of American movies, there's nothing about that I want my family's data to sit on top of. Okay, so no, not that one. And then people suggested, well, you just need a lot of language where people seem to be back and forthing. How about Reddit? Like, are you out of your mind? Like, it just like, no, my family is too valuable to sit on top of whatever language all these little chat groups are making from different right wing, left wing, whatever perspective, right? To put my family on top of that. No. And this is me valuing my family, right? And it's like, how do we value ourselves in these systems? Finally, we settled upon there was a Google Good News data set that seemed the least violent of the ones that I had access to. Yeah, no, because language is harsh, right? And language can be super violent, and we're setting up what it does through how it is. So I'm like, no, right? And I wanted the best possible thing. And then I also augmented my data set, that those oral histories that we took, with things and information that we actually took in as people. So, for example, television, and the piece will sometimes answer and talk about Mr. President. I always find it funny. And it's because there's scandal. There's scandal within the base language data set, right? So sometimes it'll just say these weird non sequiturs. I'm like, what are you talking about? Oh, it's Sanford and Sons. Okay, fine. I kind of get that. But I wanted it to be things that we had actually touched or things that we had written and things like that. So that's how I augmented the data set. But, that journey was really important because you start looking at what's available. And this is the places that researchers are going to get data, right? And we still to this day, when people are building systems, they often go to the same data sets, right? To get the information to build with. For example, I've been working with a computer scientist in Korea, and he's very well established, good computer scientist. And it's really interesting because we were using this model called Bagel. It's a large language model. And I was curious because the results we were getting looked very much like the Western results. I'm like, hey, why do we put things into Bagel and they still come out like any Western model would come out? Like he's in Korea. We're using models that seem to emanate from Asia, and we're getting the same results. And it's about what people are pulling and using to inform the models. So it's not as if being global is diversifying. It's about what do I have available to me as a researcher that I can use quickly to get my information out and pull. And if we're all going to the same well, what happens?
So there's an argument to that we need more language models or more. I think it's not called a language model, but more data sets on which to build. Like you've talked about, can we build
Mm-hmm.
kind systems, and that would be based on, and excuse my naivete about the right words to use as we're talking about this, but can you talk to me a bit about that kind systems? And that would be probably starting with a foundation of intentionally teaching it or giving it words or stories or basing it on things that are kind or that express what that means, and almost leaving out violent things. And it creates this idea that we can think about like gene editing, right? Like with CRISPR, but for our AI. So it's like trying to build different types of AI, right? You can build ones that are probably quite violent and mean, ones that are focused on empathy. And to just tell me more about that, because I just remember hearing you speak about that, and I was really intrigued by it.
Yeah, well, I think we do need to be developing more globally minded, more broad data sets instead of trying to get things out to market really quickly and using what's available. It's like, well, what can you do to teach a model to be kind? Luckily, where we are now is so much different. Like from 2018 to now, it's so much different because we have these large language models that are much easier to fine tune or to put different information on top of to kind of guide the perspective of the model. And in fact, we can kind of now describe the perspective of the way that the model is acting, right? So if people have prompted ChatGPT, you can say you are an expert in X, Y, and Z. You could say you are an expert in X, Y, and Z from, I don't know, Uganda, let's say. What perspective should you use? And then what language well would you go to? Right. And it can do a pretty decent job of now trying to be much more specific about the origins of where things are and how it is using language and how it is being empathetic and what care is. My thought has always been, well, care, it's a big concept, right? Generosity, that's a big concept. How do we even know what that means across the board? Because we're dealing with many different societies who have different ideas about what this is. But we also now have these systems that are capable of taking this information and starting to deal with it, turn with it all. Not saying this is the dominant one, but saying these are the different ways that different societies, different countries define these concepts. And this maybe is the central definition at this moment, right? And it doesn't even have to be hard codified, right? Because there's a lot of slippage there. AI makes that kind of possible. Like, how do we collectively define these things? And then look at it like I'm starting to think of it as prismatic reasoning or through a prismatic lens so that it's not that one focused point that has to be right, but the prismatic version of what it actually is shows up and can show up. I always debate with how much we want to clean or not the biases from the models. Like, we don't want the biases to be straight up top and just rampant. But to clean them completely seems like we start to erase history. And that becomes problematic as well. And so this is how I get to this, like, the nurture. Well, how do we nurture? Like, if you have a kid who goes out into the world, like, let's say you have a black son who goes out into the world. As much as I want to protect that son from any of the harms or the biased thoughts that other have, I can't. Therefore, they need to have some sort of idea of what that is and then a way to deal with it, right? And I feel like the system has the same thing. Like, we need it to know, because once we erase it, we go into that hole of ahistoric being, which allows us to make whatever rules we want, which often in our societies goes towards the powerful and those who can afford to do that work, right? Versus those who are just out there grinding. And so it's like, well, okay, then what do we do? How do we do? And how do we push the systems to do? One of the things about my practice that becomes interesting is that I feel like I've, over the years, modeled things that people have told me aren't possible. So when I was doing Not the Only One and working with small data, I was constantly told you can't do that, not possible, in a way, not valuable, right? And in a way, in some ways, people were right. Well, we didn't get perfect thing. It doesn't speak fluently, but its value is in all the things that it's teaching us about the ways in which systems are failing us and what they can do even when they are not big and complete. I used to hear from folks a lot, well, ChatGPT doesn't do exactly what I want it to do, right? And this would be things like, oh, I want it to play the dozens. Doesn't do that, doesn't know that language. It's like, oh, well, how do you know? Like, I tried like two things and it didn't do it, like, quick prompt. But if you work it and push it, it is possible to get really close to doing playing the dozens, right? But you have to push it. Or I also go, well, hackers are pushing these things all the time, making them do things that they're not supposed to do. How might we do this? And luckily now we can do it with language. Like it's just like language we have access to, right? And that to me is fascinating and powerful if we take it up.
Yeah, it's something that as an like average consumer or user of AI, you don't think. You think if I ask it a question and it doesn't give me the answer, it must not know it, it must not be able to. But it's almost like a person with so much knowledge, they might have forgotten how, or the knowledge is the way you ask the question wasn't correct. They couldn't understand it, but that doesn't mean that it can't do it. And that to me is extremely fascinating because it's this idea that I think we've really stretched our minds in our ability to, you know, 10, well, 15, 20 years ago, it was like AI was a thing of the future, robots were a thing of the future. And I think the average person has kind of understood, okay, it's this thinking thing, but you don't realize that it's growing actively as we're talking to it. It kind of blows my mind just hearing you say that if you work it, you're almost getting it to react in real time, to think in real time, to try to figure out, and that is so close to a human. I mean, it's a human quality. It's scary.
It's interesting because it's like, yeah, if you're a user, not a consumer, because I'm trying to get people not to just consume it, like a user and a deep user. If you then, push it enough and ask it enough, or if you go down even like TikTok prompting videos, like people are telling you, and these are page-long prompts that they've developed to get the thing they want out of the thing. Like just crazy length prompts. But once you do that prompt, does this thing that you thought was not even possible. And that's fascinating because now you have a powerful, powerful tool at your hands.
I didn't know there was like a prompting TikTok channel that I should probably dive into. But it's funny because, a big debate in the creative world is working with AI, we're going to be managing machines and it's taking away our creativity, which to an extent it cancels out one version of it. But I recently was using Midjourney doing video, playing around with video prompting. And I was like, the amount of creativity and specificity it takes to get what you want from an AI in that sense, which is going to your point that you just made, is highly creative. Whereas like a creative brainstorm session amongst people is kind of throwing things at the wall. It's almost like you have to be like a Da Vinci level painter with words and prompts. And that was really interesting. I was very surprised. I was like, oh, there is creativity in that, in working with with the AI.
Yeah, I think there can be a lot of creativity, right? And that prompting thing you're just saying, right? The deeper you go, like people often think, oh, a prompt is, you cast away two or three sentences. But it can be weeks and months of work to get it to do the thing you actually want it to do. And you have to be super creative about it to get something out of it that isn't just the slop that comes down the pipe. But when people do it well, it's like, what, like, oh, what is this crazy, unusual thing that you have just done through language? And people are starting to take it up. Like I'm waiting, or somebody's probably already done this, but for the really great film that some kid makes somewhere through prompting, because somebody's going to make a like just a spectacle, like you could just see it, because suddenly the things that would take so much money are accessible in this other way, right? Or you can conjure up the images that you're thinking about. And if you can conjure deeply enough and creatively enough, it's like, oh, we are in for a ride because it should get wild. Like if we take it, it should get wild.
Yeah, it's likely to get wild for sure.
Super wild in every direction, right? Because you could think about a lot of wilds out there.
Yeah, exactly. Both good and bad.
Yeah. But the stories that we will like people can tell that we don't often get to see because it costs too much money, nobody's financing it. Becomes a different kind of endeavor. It feels to me like so much potential energy is there if we let it. Like if we hold on really tightly to the old ways, which I know is hard to let go of, then we know that all the things and people are going to be disgruntled and jobs are going to go. If we kind of sit that hybrid thing and start thinking about, well, what's the collaborative path, right? Or that's at least my thing. It's like, oh, how am I collaborating with this thing? And what can we come up with together? I don't have to be the dominant one. It doesn't have to be the dominant one, but where do we swim in between? Then there's just all this possibility, you know. And I've come to the conclusion that, like learning is a thing and learning to learn and learning to work with systems and keep them going becomes really, really important. And it's just something we're going to have to do. Like the things we thought we knew, sadly, are not going to be as directly, but applicable because you know things that still apply to these worlds. Now, how do you apply them differently? But so often, if our skills don't match exactly, we get scared.
Well, it feels like we're standing at the edge of a cliff and the holding on,
Mm-hmm.
and it's such a vast cliff. And I think I've heard people talk about how at the advent of every major technology, whether it was the car, it was like a big deal, but there was nothing that completely changed the way that the world, the entire world, the way that we are going to do everything. The biggest fear people have is that we have to let go of some of our humanity. Humanity maybe isn't the word, like our humanness, the things that we love to do, that we've gotten used to doing, the jobs that we're comfortable with, you know, I'm a, I'm a writer, I'm a accountant, I love numbers, I'm a painter, I like to paint. And now it's suddenly there's more creative visuals being output rapidly per second than we can humanly do. And that fear is, I think, really singular to this moment because it's our whole world kind of breaking apart in a way. But I agree that it feels very exciting. And once I turned my mind to accepting that this is happening, it felt very freeing because the future could be dire, could be wonderful. Who knows how it will actually go? But it's a whole new frontier.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's and anything could happen.
Human individuality is going to get more and more important. For example, I've done a project where we're trying to cast voices, right? Get voice actors for the project. And it was super interesting to see that go online and now you see all these voices who are trying to make that movie man voice, like that homogenized voice, right? People kind of used to gravitate to that or some constant, like voice that was made for TV. But right now, we can do that in 2 seconds. Like you can go online and create a script and have it read out in a voice, like whether it's that movie man's voice or something else. 10 minutes. No, it's no big deal to reproduce that kind of thing. But to get the thing that's really individual, for example, we were looking for Native American accents, we were looking for Bronx accents. And to get those things, much harder. Not so easy just to go and get the version online because that's not the center, right? That everybody thinks we're running towards anymore. So the thing that was most valuable to me was the anomaly, the creativity, the way that people actually are versus the way that the thing that makes them more commercially valuable. And so it's something about the way we are that becomes more valuable, I think, than the thing that we could create that is just the pipeline version of the thing. It's been interesting to hit that a lot.
Do you think And this is one of my final thoughts, that in that space that there's going to be more room, in your words, to greater creativity because of more accessibility to the ability to tell stories that haven't been made traditionally, people's ability to express themselves better, or to see more individualistic viewpoints. After that happens, after there's all these amazing, and there's 8 billion people on the planet, right? There's 8 billion perspectives. Do you think there will remain space for human inquiry in things like the arts once everyone's done sharing their story? We've hit this pinnacle where there was just stories that were told to us by the studios and the white guys that were making the things, and then we hit like a new age where they told more diverse stories and people fought for that, and then now we're hitting this wave of everyone's going to be able to tell their story. But will there remain space for humans to inquire when we've given it all to the machine, and it can even do that for us? Like, once there will reach a point where it can do a Native American voice on a dime, and it can do, every little thing, and it might happen quite quickly
Very
because
quick.
it does learn so fast. And so, like, in that time, like whether it's tomorrow or 5 years from now or 10 years from now or 30 years from now, is there a point at which the need for us will disappear? And specifically through the creative lens, the inquiry lens, will there remain space for us once we teach it everything and give it everything and teach it kindness and teach it cruelty? And because I think that's everyone's fear.
It's a hard thought because there's this place where you go, oh yeah, we're done. Like these things are gonna do all this stuff. But I also think that there's a point at which we will want something unique and new. And so I always think it's up to us to do that deeper work. Because if you think right now and you think about what's getting created, it's often regurgitations of things that were created 10, 15 years ago. A lot of it to me as well depends on how humans think about themselves. Do we think that we are the be all end all top of the pile and still want to do things where we are the buck stops here? We are the thing. Or do we think of ourselves as part of this continuum and quickly changing continuum that has gone on for a very long time? How do we start to position ourselves within our environments, between technology, between nature, the human? And then how do we decide that human creativity is just one of many kinds of creativity and that it can work in concert with those other types of creativity?